I think it might be helpful to start from the start, Abhishek, though,
Let's
because
take it from the top.
yeah,
Sounds
let's
good.
take it from the top. Today we have, I mean, yes, thank you for joining in, and it feels really great. And I think every time now we've been reconnecting a few times in between, but it's just so much of peace to be, having a conversation with you, and a topic that I think you're the best person to do it. Someone who is a man himself, has worked with men, and as I was saying earlier, you've been someone who I've seen time and again, irrespective of whoever the individual is, creating a space where they can show up, a space where, in the sense of safety and comfort, also like where we want to ask more questions for ourselves and do our inner work. So really excited for our conversation today, Abhishek, about men's mental health, and opening it up to you, inviting you to share your experience and everything that's been going on so far in this realm of men's mental health, and being a man in the current world.
Thank you for having me over, Shilpa. Uh, and yeah, it's a vast spectrum. Maybe I want to start with what is it to be a man? What is the experience of being a man? Of course, for me, the experience of being a man as a child, even without being told don't cry, was don't cry, be strong, also be rough and rugged, almost like don't care much for your body. That's for girls. So the very
Mm.
clearly that's for girls. This is for boys. Not crying is for boys. Sports is for boys, and so on. And I think so many of us as a product of. And I have to add a disclaimer. I'm a product of the 80s generation, but I think it still continued in 90s
Yeah.
and across socioeconomic classes. I don't think it's slowly changing, I guess. But
Mhm.
being a man starts with being a boy, and being a boy is a lot about other boys and the masti and the bullying and the having to still be strong in face of it,
Yeah.
uh, and the teenagery awkwardness and the missing father
Mm.
who's at work and mother who for me at least was home, and for a lot of my generation kids. And
Yeah.
so therefore not even knowing what it is to be a man, like not having role models or elder men around whose masculine energy one could absorb, who could teach you what it is to be or live like a man. So all self-taught, trial and error
Mhm.
kind of ways, and then slowly kind of entering a world which is a world filled with and run with alpha males, right?
Yeah.
Like everywhere, the role models that we have are all kind of sort of, when I say alpha males, hustling, a little
Mm.
aggressive or lots of aggression, lots of climbing dominance hierarchies and kind of reaching at the top, and being the man in the room, being the attention in the room, the conversation
Yeah.
in the room, and therefore constantly hierarchy, living with that hierarchy, wanting to get to the top, sparring with other men, not really getting intimate and close to them, having women best friends, but man to man just reaching a very surface level conversation about
Mm.
sports or politics, or but not really going heart to heart and so on. So and then at some stage starting to feel that hey, there is some work to be done as a
Mm.
man, because I don't think I've fully owned my identity as a man, and I don't know, I'm like late 20s and I don't know what it is to be a man. So that's kind of how it all started, and that I don't even feel safe in presence of other men because I don't know them as well as I know women.
Mm.
Like I don't know
Yeah.
what suddenly happens. Is a threat of violence or threat of being, how will I deal with other men? I think
Mm.
that's where my pre-men's work me was.
Okay.
And when we tallied notes with other men, we are all like, whoa, our best friends are women. And though men don't understand men, we've not spoken heart to heart what the hell is going on.
Yeah.
And interestingly, when we look at the West had a men's movement, a
Mhm.
mythopoetic men's movement also, and the broader men's movement of really what is it to be a man and so on. We were inspired by the movement of the West and kind of started coming together around the question of what is it to be a man.
Mhm.
Right. And then from then on, it's been a journey of embracing my identity as a man, showing up as a man, and as an authentic man. I'm glad I'm in the
Yeah.
authentic living space because, yeah, what is it to be an authentic man, not a fake man, but
Yeah.
what is it to be authentic as a man? So I'll pause here, but yeah, that's kind of that's where I want to enter into men's mental health from.
Okay.
That the journey of being a man is filled with being caught in straitjackets or in limited prisons and walls of who you can be,
Mhm.
social pressures, always wanting to be or having to be useful, always sparring with other men, always being strong. So a
Yeah.
bunch of these things together is where our men's mental health crisis currently stands.
Okay. And from what you said, Abhishek, few things that stood out for me was one is like for women, we have been the sisterhood, like the relationship, the dynamic of sisterhood is one of the most precious one that I think has helped us all navigate and continue to help us all navigate because that's your space to like. I know that we've been have had conversations with somebody when men are like, there's nobody in the world who knows me, like there's nobody who knows me in and out sort of a thing, or maybe there's one person, while for women we've been able to, I don't want to compare it, like I know currently we're talking primarily about men, but just the essence of support, it's safety net. I always tell that a lot of things what I'm able to do with life is because I know at the end of the day when if I fall I have a safety net, and the majority of the safety net is your same gendered support system because of how they were able to get you sort of a thing. So that's one. And the other thing that you had mentioned about how there's no model, like a role model of what men are supposed to do. Just adding on to that, I remember we'd done a workshop on prevention of child sexual abuse, and the conversation was about like, given that the percentage of abusers are more in the male men category, it's not that they're born that way. So the whole dynamic of not having a present male to to model, because childhood you learn through modeling, it's also trying to do the exact opposite of what women do or what their mother figure, the feminine figure that they have. So I guess it's interesting about how there are like so many things that's underlying, which needs to be addressed, as you said. But this is a couple of thoughts that came to my mind the moment you mentioned this, the challenges of what it is to be a man. Yeah.
Yeah, no, there are several things, Shilpa, that need to be addressed. I patriarchy combined with capitalism, combined with statism, kind of
Yeah.
the larger structure we find ourselves in,
Mm-hmm.
where one is men have to be useful, and they
Yeah.
draw their identity from being useful. And
Mm-hmm.
the number of house husbands we have compared to the number of housewives, so to speak, we have there must be a huge difference, right? Because being a
Yeah.
house husband is like, oh my God, is it even okay to do that? Is it
Mm.
okay as a man to not
Uh,
Yeah. Did I drop away for the last 30
Yes,
seconds?
yes, yes. For a few seconds, you said that what it is like the question of whether to be a house husband is even something like that was
Very,
the
very
last.
few husbands. Like, who are you if you can't solve a problem? Are you even a man? If you're
Yeah.
not
Oof.
useful, are you even a man? So on one end, it's that. On the other end, it's a huge domestication of men, right?
Mm.
So in general, with with dignity, giving every man his dignity versus putting them into hierarchies and kind of domesticating them both at home and at work. And
Mm.
therefore, with the wildness of a man, there's no space for a wildness of a man to truly be expressed healthily. So it
Yeah.
gets expressed in either office politics or fast driven cars or all kinds of places. But really, the urge to be wild, the urge to explore, so all that is kind of pruned, domesticated. Uh, on the other end, also in terms of just sexualizing, like keeping all human beings, but also men on the edge, keeping them consuming.
Mhm.
So you're kind of doing multiple things simultaneously. You're kind of making the person a cog in the wheel, having to be productive while being surrounded by a set of constraints and still driving them, their identities, linking them to consumption, saying, oh, this. So we've kind of created this world, and then to add to it, and this is going to be a little controversial or edgy, is that in the feminist narratives, men are privileged, and they are privileged. I don't deny that there's centuries of oppression that's been carried out by men. And at the same time, that narrative also backgrounds the struggles men themselves go through, right? Because suddenly you're like, oh, okay, sorry, I'm privileged, so as a man, it puts me in a difficult place. So where is space for me to talk about
Mm.
what's on with me? And my feminist friends say, okay, go and do that in your men's circles. It's like, how many men have men's circles? I think the sisterhood has come online before brotherhood. In humanity,
Yes. Yeah.
the sisterhood is forming, brotherhoods are still forming, but they are
Mhm.
forming, and they're forming all over. uh,
Yeah.
so yeah, so I think there is space for the
Mhm.
bromance to happen and nourish people's hearts and lives. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely, Abhishek. I have a question when you were speaking. What was it like for you? Because you mentioned in your early 20s, before you got into the working with men and just your own work, what has transitioned for you? Like, what is life like right now for you with
Oh yeah, I mean, my life is filled with a lot of bromance.
Okay.
What has transitioned for me is that this part of my being, which I didn't even know was parched and thirsty,
Mm.
is filled now with love from the other men in my life. The brotherly
Okay.
love of being not only in terms of verbal love, but in terms of being held, being
Mhm.
supported in solidarity, physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally. And to tap into that has required all of us to go outside this alpha male construct into the bro land. If I call it bro land, bro land is where all men are equal and they can be themselves and they hold each other together as one, you know. And there are two, three, I think, images that I want to talk about because that
Mhm.
has shifted for me for sure. Uh, I think one is just the idea of a man and a man, two brothers, really, can they get along? And one
Mm.
way I think about it is the first time the two brothers fought, instead of caring for each other's families, they decided to want a little more for themselves and they got into a fight. And I feel like the world is nothing but two men fighting now on a Garangutan scale and just wanting a little extra. And I feel like it's really men going overdrive. Like whenever I look at the
Mhm.
violent leaders of the world, I don't see as many women as I see men, right? It's just like
Mhm. Yeah.
men going very alpha, overly alpha, and like kind of
Mhm.
doing that. So I think that's kind of gone because I think the brotherhood not only nourishes but also grounds. It
Mm.
reminds a
Also
man
agree.
who he is and what he's about and what he's supposed to do and what is his highest and most gentle self. Right.
Mm.
So I think so the presence of the brotherhood is not only nourishing, also grounding. Right. So I think that I would say is one major thing that's different. The other is also I have been able to acknowledge my innate man grief. We call it man, the grief of and the grief of generations of men being sent for war or
Mm.
being sent into prisons or being pulled for whatever humanity needed at that point of time. Like if you need war, get the men to do it. If you need
Yeah.
food, send the men. So there is that whole maybe there is a man grief or there is humanity grief, but I'm saying as men, also the grief
Mhm.
of really the relationship with the father. Most of us,
Mm.
when we tallied our relationship with our parents and especially fathers, was challenging. Father-son relationship, tough, tough, tough.
Yeah.
Uh, the innate loneliness of being a man, which people who don't have circles of brothers kind of experience. So I think for me, what changed was just being in touch with all these things also. My
Mm.
loneliness, my grief, my challenges with my father, the mother. So all those kind of things I think became normalized. Uh,
Okay.
and my acceptance of my wild side, saying yes, being wild as a man, I think I have a wild side. I want a space to express it, and I will.
Mhm. Mhm.
So in a constructive way,
Yeah.
right? So I think some of that has definitely shifted.
Okay. That's very interesting. The thing that you mentioned about grounding, I can see that like the amount it would be great for everybody, all as human, to have space to be more grounded, and definitely the peers play a big role in doing that. That's interesting, Abhishek. I wanted to ask
One
you,
thing I
yeah, go on.
wanted to add to that, Shilpa, was
Yeah.
that one thing about a man-to-man relationship is that there are it's a boundaried relationship, and it's a lot about honoring each other's boundaries.
Hmm.
So I don't know how it is in a woman-to-woman relationship, but somehow from my
Yeah.
vantage point, I'm like women-to-women is more intertwined and more like you can
Yes.
get into each other's business. But a
Hmm.
bro-to-bro relationship is, I know my limits of how much I can intervene in your life. I'm with you. I'm going to remind you, but I'm also going to back off at some stage. And I think that finding that
Yeah.
boundary between bros
Hmm.
and honoring that boundary, right? Because you don't want to
Yeah.
cross that either for each other. I think that's a very distinct flavor of a man-to-man relationship. And a lot of times, not being able to figure that piece is what prevents men from too much proximity because it's like, oh, if I'm too close to the man, is he going to tell me how to live, how to, be with my wife or my kids, or is he going to ask me my income? And it's too
Hmm.
much intimacy for me from any other man, right?
Hmm.
So I think negotiating that man-to-man boundary, I just thought I'll make that point because
Absolutely.
not being
Yeah.
able to do that costs intimacy because you didn't know
Yeah.
how to negotiate boundaries. So you said, I'd rather not be intimate, right? With
Okay.
other.
Absolutely. Are there any more such aspects that you have seen that plays a role in building the brotherhood that currently you're experiencing and having? Like, what does it take in to build it?
Lot of respect for other men and stopping to be status signaling and status climbing. So
Okay.
respect for every other man that they're going through their struggles, they're doing their best, and they're not
Mm-hmm.
inferior or lesser men. You know,
Mm.
it's how do I say? It's not a dick measuring contest to be
Yeah.
politically
Yeah.
correct. That
Yeah.
it's really a brotherhood,
Mm.
and so you respect every person, every man for who they are,
Okay.
right? And you also kind of hold them to the highest standard for themselves. So I
Mm-hmm.
think the respect, dignity aspect, and trusting, stopping this whole alpha mailing kind of I
Yeah.
think only on the other side of alpha mailing is the true brotherhood. And the moment somebody
Absolutely.
enters as an alpha mailing, the rest of the brotherhood has to kind of bring this guy back, saying, "This is the brotherhood space, not an alpha mailing. You don't have to signal or show how you're better
Mm-hmm.
here. There's no woman here to impress. There's an
Yeah.
all men's group. You don't need to do this." So it needs all the
Okay.
other men to bring to, and when men then let go of that guard, and
Mm-hmm.
when they allow that, oh my god, emotions, sensitivity, desires, dreams, hopes, failures, like there's a whole sea of emotions which were not visible because you thought he was this man who had his act
Yeah.
together and he's going about in the world, and you're like, oh my god, these are like what, like these you kind of wonder like what's really going on, these softies, these mushy things which
Mm-hmm.
are living inside, and then they come out. It's so healing for everybody to see that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So
I think it's
yeah,
collective healing. Collective healing is happening in that process, I'm sure, when
collective
that
healing
happens.
process. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Abhishek, so in this context that we spoke about, just want to pull the conversation a little bit back to the support system that currently exists, and I would love to know more about the current brotherhood thing, the men's circle, all of that that's happening. But on the other side, as individuals, what is their experience currently with respect to emotions, their mental health, and there's a lot of pressure. I think one thing that when I think about a male figure is it must be constant pressure because you are expected at all points of time to, as you said, perform. Like your sense of identity is more about who you are or what you do more than anything else. And I know it's kind of universally there right now across genders, but it's a lot more for you know men. So cis het men specifically. So what is it like navigating that, and from your experience or from what you've seen around people, how does it affect their mental health? Because I feel like we only see when things get really bad. Like that's when it's acknowledged, when it's out of control. But yeah, just over to you related to that.
You're right. It is very tough. It is a lot of pressure. The pressure to
Hmm.
provide, the pressure to prove, the pressure to perform, like you said.
Yeah.
The whole idea of mardangi, masculinity, like is he
Hmm.
man enough,
Yeah.
kind of kind of notions, and those get internalized. Not only are there external, but like my own identity as a man starts coming out from there. And so the pressure is not only external but internally within myself. I'm like, oh
Absolutely.
god, if I'm not earning for my family, I'm an inadequate man kind of a thing. A lot of emotional suppression then, like
Yeah.
where is the safe space? If I become weak, then everybody will lose hope.
Hmm.
So I can't be weak, right? Like she's a woman, she can cry. It's like that. What Godfather one has that dialogue, right? That women and children can be careless, but not men, right? Like
Mm.
some kind of a dialogue there, which captures the zeitgeist of how men
Yeah.
think about each other and themselves. That oh, women and children can be weak, but not men. Men must be
Mm.
strong.
Yeah.
So this whole suppression of emotions which are considered weak, and then
Mm.
them creating the psychosomatic impacts of
Yeah.
those,
Yeah.
and then seeing higher suicide rates, higher heart attacks, uh, higher kind of medications that probably men
Yeah.
take. So it
Hmm.
it net net becomes it shows up in that particular way for sure. So yes, the experience kind of is a very challenging experience. There are very few spaces. Modern man and modern middle class man, given how much time is spent in work, commutes, running life, shopping, a little bit of parenting, there's very little man to man space where you can deep dive and
Yeah.
kind of rest. You meet, drink, talk sports, and leave is not really a men's circle, right? So
Hmm.
I think yeah. So it's a tough situation. Yeah, it's tough.
That's
And
true.
like I said, being privileged, your responsibility to restore the balance of power is still already there on you. You cannot say, "Oh God, how bad is it?" From because it is worse maybe for other sections. And
Yeah.
as a privileged group, it is your responsibility to redistribute power, to restore dignity, equity.
Hmm.
That's also there, right? So yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's very interesting because from like a lot of work that I have been doing in the last 1 year, especially with respect to like well-being, health and well-being, like emotions, suppressed emotions, and all of that plays such a big role in be it any of the autoimmune conditions, be it cancer, be it so many health issues, right? So I can, and also if you look at it as you said, and just thinking back about all the men, and I know women also have it, so I'm not at all excluding them. That can be a separate conversation. But just the amount of health issues as they grow older is going to be significant. It is significant as it happens, and I also noticed that probably now, like people, my father's generation, like my father, there's so much of like more openness to emotions and expression. I recently asked him, I'm like, at what age do men feel like they have permission to express? Right. So that's just a thing, the conversation that we were having, because I feel like the social conditioning kind of stops you for a really long time until probably you're like, okay, enough is enough, or something has happened in life that you have to put a stop to it, or you're just old enough to be like, okay, I don't want to give a damn about what the society thinks about me, sort of a thing. So it's a sad reality.
Yeah. And even I think giving one is getting the permission to be emotional from the world,
Mm.
but giving myself the permission. So when I look at myself internally, I'm like, oh my God, I'm so senti. I'm so senti. And is it okay to be so senti about people, about life? And is it okay to not hustle so much, but really, really just like care for people? Right? And
Hmm.
just to give myself permission to allow all my emotional intensities, given people around me see me as a man and expect me to be in a
Yeah.
certain way. I have an amazing circle that absorbs and receives it. But just
Hmm.
giving permission to myself to be emotional, forget like from my
Yeah,
environment. I think that itself as a man is like a whole deal, right? Like, yeah,
absolutely. That
yeah.
comes with so much shame attached to it as well because of all of this.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying a lot of this is internalized. A lot of censorship
Yeah.
is internalized, judgment, criticism is internalized, restrictions are internalized. It's not even out there
Hmm.
anymore. It's in
Yeah.
men's heads and in their beings.
Hmm. Absolutely. What can men do, right? And so there is, I'm sure there's certain set who's going about their life. There is a certain set of people who are doing deep work and have already found their community support system. But I'm sure there's a big percentage of men out there who are curious, who understand there is a need to dive deeper, reach out, seek support, all of those, or even struggling with their own health, mental health, loneliness, and all of those. So, what can they do at this point of time? And probably not reach externally, even just internally for themselves as individuals. What would be those few things that they could explore at this point of time?
Yeah. I think first is to acknowledge there's a problem and it's a life-threatening problem because loneliness or emotions which are bottled can threaten your life, right? So
Yeah.
acknowledging, and several people who don't even realize there's a problem or go about as if there's no problem. So first
Mhm.
is to kind of say there's a problem. Um, Second is starting with our own nurturance, right? Men are not taught as much to nurture themselves and to take care of their own bodies, do what they love because they're always busy proving, being useful, and so
Mhm.
on. So just nurturing yourself, and nurturing
Mhm.
yourself not only looks like physical care or pampering yourself, but also maybe spending time in nature or do nothing time. And I think a lot of men don't nurture themselves and are depleted all the time, right? Because
Yeah.
they're too busy being men, if I have to put it
Mhm.
that way.
Yeah.
Third, SOS would be find the brotherhood, right? And this is
Hmm.
the toughest thing to do because it's very hard for men to be vulnerable with other men,
Yeah.
right? And even if you go back to your childhood or your work colleagues, there are already existing equations which are fossilized. So it's very
Yeah.
hard to go deep into the conversation. Sometimes alcohol helps. That's why men love to sit and drink and then open their hearts out because like बैठ के पीते हैं types. But finding the brotherhood is kind of I would say non-negotiable. And it may
Yeah.
not be your childhood group friend or your work colleagues. It may be a different interest group of people. And there is a lot of men's work happening. There are different groups that are doing work also. All you need to do is reach out. So
Mhm.
finding the brotherhood, informing yourself also of a lot of men's work. So men's work is not new. You're standing on generations of men who have written poetry and books and reflected on what it is to be a man. And that gives vocabulary, that gives language, that gives frames,
Yeah.
right, to be able to do that. Lastly, I've had to tune my ecosystem into who I want to be. So really, if I'm
Mm.
going to be more emotional, I need to let my ecosystem around me know that okay, I'm going to be more emotional and I want to be supported because otherwise there's a pushback from them saying, "Oh my God, what happened?" Right?
Yeah.
So you need to also tune your ecosystem into your journey of being a more sensitive man or a more authentic man, right?
Mhm.
So some of these, uh, yeah, and maybe each of us, not only men, but also men, need to realize what system we are plugged into and you'll start seeing how that system structures are internalized and how they affect us and what they make us do. And so on. So yeah, I think some of that I would say would be definitely some things men could do.
Okay. I think this is helpful. And when you mentioned the aspect of like the surrounding the resistance, I think anytime there is change happening, there is going to be a sense of like discomfort, not just within yourself, but a lot more for people who are also witnessing you in your close circles, because you're kind of changing your whole sense of identity. So just being, I think, even being patient with that. I feel like anybody doing any sort of inner work experience that, and for men probably more, because the identity is very external at this point of time for a lot of people. So to internalize that is also one thing I'm just wondering about.
I think in this moment in time and history also, it's helpful to understand what's happening with men. That
Mm.
feminism has gone through subsequent waves and has reached a whole new level.
Yeah.
And in our circles, so many women have come into their own, so to speak, or have become themselves.
Mhm.
And men who have been privileged so far and haven't had to really bother about anything because life kind of worked. Of course, it didn't work on the emotional and the side we spoke about,
Yeah.
but broadly life worked. And now questions are coming up about privilege, about DEI, about
Mhm.
posh, about really how are you conducting yourself as a man. And
Yeah.
men are constantly falling short. Like we
Mm.
have a whole circle of a lot of eligible single women who are like, where are the men? Where are
Yes.
the men? Men are like kind of, it seems like men are catching up, or like the next
Yeah.
generation men are much more agile and so on. So we have this
Absolutely.
bunch of emancipated independent women,
Mm.
and we're asking where are the men, where are the men, and men still taking time to figure out. And what I say on behalf of men, and including myself and our brotherhood, is that give it time, because
Yeah.
every generation of men has responded to the challenge of their times.
Mm.
And the challenge of our times as men is to respond to a new set of expectations, which includes being more in touch with emotions, but also not sacrificing the other things about men. So it's almost like the expectation is chivalry as much as not being chauvinistic. Like you have to play the
Yeah.
edge of both. It's not like it's
Yeah.
flipped, right? So it's more
Yeah.
complexity, it's more nuance, it's more
Mhm.
contextuality, it's more
Mm.
responsibility. So it's challenging because it's serious pressure on, and the feeling of inadequacy is the worst feeling for a man, right?
Yeah.
Feeling as a man, you don't want to feel inadequate. So I think it's
Absolutely.
a very interesting moment in history where the pressures on men are not only by the structure they are a part of or the upbringing, but also the moment in history where the relationship between genders and how
Yeah.
it's playing out, right? So all that adds to what's asked of men, and
Absolutely.
that's a great thing because I feel men love challenges. I think they thrive when
Mhm.
challenges are there, and if they see this as the challenge of times, they'll be at it and be on the other side of it in no time.
I hope so too. I think that that's an interesting that you brought out point that you brought out, because even when like I talk to somebody or just people around us, it's always a question is where are the men? And we know
Right.
it's almost like a it's like a what do you say, they're in the oven getting ready sort of a feeling, getting baked to the right this thing. But yeah, I guess it's we're all evolving. I think for women also we've had to do it in different ways. Children, even parents, I'm seeing changes in how parents are parenting. So across all demography generations, we're all having to like really own up and level up in a lot of ways. But I also hope that that pressure does not come in at the cost of somebody's individual well-being, and that component of just ability to survive and thrive sort of a thing.
Yeah. I think I would say that a problem well understood is more than half solved. And what I'm
That's true.
saying is that I don't think men fully understand, all of us, the
Hmm.
nature and complexity of what we're facing,
Yeah.
uh, which is in some ways unprecedented because it's so many levels of
Hmm.
things that have opened up. And so the complexity, and in that being authentic to myself, because who knows, today I feel very kind of heterosexual man, and maybe tomorrow I'm feeling a little more fluid and on the spectrum. And I mean, all of this is so fluid, right?
Yeah.
So to be authentic to myself is like anyways a full-time job, and
Yes.
in and it's a never-ending job because who I am is not
Yes.
so static. And in the
Yes.
presence of that, as a man with the work and privilege kind of questioning that is coming, my upbringing, my pressures, so there's a lot
Mhm.
going on.
Absolutely. I was actually thinking that, because when you were listing the things that needs to be done, and I was just wondering that plus a full-time job plus commitments, expectations, there's very little time, because all of this, as you said, and as we know for sure, takes time to reflect, to introspect, bring about those changes. The inner work is time consuming. So it's almost like the world is not structured to enable that at this point of time. Then we have to just like, take responsibility and make time for ourselves. Everybody, like as individuals, to do it whenever we choose to do it.
Yeah. I think there I would say that we have coupled time and money very tightly,
Yeah.
very tightly. So what
Mm-hmm.
happens is, because we exchange time for money, so
Yeah.
there's a direct relation, and money accumulates money on interest, which is across time.
Mm-hmm.
So money becomes
Yeah.
less valuable over time. So the lack of time really, to me, originates from the current structure where we have coupled it tightly with
Agreed.
money, and money with resources and survival, because you need money with so to retrieve time from a time for money exchange world literally
Mm-hmm.
means I'll have less, literally means I'll have less
Yeah.
resources. Then I'm insecure.
Mm-hmm.
So I need to feed my securities apart from my basics. I'm on a constant, always improve, always grow kind of mindset. So the
Yeah.
lack of time is structural. I don't think lack of time is only, we talk about it as a fact. Like, of course, nobody has time. But why does nobody have time is because we're locked into a structure
Agreed.
which we are not able to reclaim. So part of the challenge is reclaiming the time and vitality. I think one is the time
Absolutely.
layer, the other is also the vitality layer. Like, why don't people have energy? Because all their energy is gone into showing up at work, and when they come at home, they just want to turn on the next web series and
Yeah.
just consume, because your vitality got taken away. So
Mm.
reclaiming time, reclaiming vitality, redirecting it is all a part of the challenge of our times.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you on this. And like it's a reality. And as you said, it's about making those changes, decisions, and being happy with lesser. I think that's going to be also the big part of it, because, but what you gain in return is invaluable. At least that's how I feel, is invaluable from a everyday living experience point of view.
It's just like you're not the size of your car. Like, you don't need
Yeah.
the bright red
Yeah.
SUV driving at like 120 on the road to feel like a man.
Yeah.
You can
Yeah.
still be a walk in the forest and you can still feel like a man. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
Absolutely.
decoupling a lot of that. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. This has been interesting, Abhishek. I have one last question, and otherwise, if you have anything more to share, I'd love to hear from you as well. As um, if there's one, if there's like this really like one practice, that practice, thought, anything, exploration that you would recommend for men out there right now, what would that be?
Wow, that's
Which they could do over time. Sorry, I know I just threw it at you, but I was just thinking.
there's so much, but intuitively, what is coming to me is time in wilderness, and I'll explain why.
Mm,
Uh, I think the disconnection from nature,
mm,
uh, and therefore being very anthropocentric and being out of touch with the wonder of life, being not feeling one with existence, but feeling a sense of separation.
mm,
I feel men feel a lot more separation because they don't have a monthly period or a cycle that
yeah,
kind of forces them to reconnect. They're not giving birth. The women, I feel, have inbuilt mechanisms to be close to
yeah,
nature compared to men. So it's easier for men to disconnect from
mm,
the innate interconnectedness of things. It's easier to forget,
yeah,
right? And time in nature and wilderness, particularly not cultivated nature, I feel reconnects all of us to some parts of ourselves which are primal,
mm,
you know and and to me, the sense of community, the whole wild nature of us over so many generations, there is some form of reconnection that happens in wilderness.
mm,
And I know it's not a very practical thing, and I myself I'm starved of or parched for wanting more of either the wilderness or the sea, but nature, basically time in nature,
yeah,
because I think feeling small is important. When you
mm,
feel small in nature, the humility, the grounding, the impermanence of life, the melting away of the ego self, all
yeah,
that I think is at the root of this whole pressure of being man. So I think, to
absolutely.
me, contemplative periods in wilderness is my intuitive answer. I think that's the
Okay,
space from where shift begins. I don't know, that was not an
okay.
answer, but that's what came to me.
No, but it is. I think it's a like when I think of expansiveness, this is like a word that I've personally been just exploring, like our capacity to hold, like just expansiveness in life itself. And the first thing that comes is spend time in nature. Because I think
Yeah.
there's so much of answers we can get from there, or just so much of like it may not be conscious, but I feel like unconsciously there's a lot that rewiring of sorts that happens in nature, which is, you don't have to spend for it. You can like just take time out and go and do that. So It's
Yeah, even
accessible.
and the other thing, Shilpa, I want to add is even if a bunch of men spend time in wilderness, that's very different from spending time in an amusement park or in a resort.
Yeah.
Because there
Yeah.
is certain vulnerability that comes from being in the wild.
Hmm.
That you're not now you're not the king of the world. Now you're like in a vulnerable place and sticking together as men, which hundreds
Yeah.
of generations of men have done and
Yeah.
brought us to this point. So I feel it'll evoke some kind of a primal memory about men being together and being
Hmm.
one, being together for their tribe and all. So I really
Yeah.
like feel that throw a bunch of men into the wilderness and let them kind of survive and do things, and that might rebond them very deeply.
Hmm. Yeah. And they also have a challenge to be alive, come back alive.
Yeah, it might not be so rough, but yeah, but you get the spirit of what I'm saying, For
Yes,
them,
yes, absolutely.
there is cellular
Absolutely.
memory in us of so many
Yeah,
generations of being that way.
absolutely.
So yeah, so I
Absolutely.
would say that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Abhishek. It was one thing that was interesting for me, and I don't know if it is part of the narrative because it's natural to compare. But even though we were talking about men, there's so many examples in which when I was trying to correlate, it was a lot about like my example as a woman, like my experience as a woman, and I was just very fascinated by it because I know if I am in a conversation, we're talking about the feminine and women in their full power. And if we keep drawing parallels from men's example, that'd be very annoying, right? Like, she'd be like, why? Why are you comparing? But I saw myself do that. And I was just like, okay, but how else do we make sense of it? So
Yeah.
and it kind of starts from the very starting that you mentioned of like men, because they don't have conversations, they don't witness their fathers, like the masculine in their life growing up, boys, how it is, there's a correlation between how it is with their mothers. So the same thing, like even comparison, there's so much conversation happening, and I was catching myself doing that. And I was like, is there a better way to do this? That's what I was wondering.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
tough one. So
it's an interesting
thank you.
one.
Thank you for having me over,
Thank
Shilpa.
you.
And this
Thank you
was
so much, Abhishek.